What's up, beautiful people? I'm Nathaniel Pearl,
And I'm Sam Sheva.
and welcome to Curious Chimps Podcast, a show where we explore the infinite complexities of the human experience.
We do not endorse anything illegal, so please consult doctors, do your research, and for the love of all that is holy, be safe. All right, let's talk about drugs.
Curious Chimps.
A few of my friends who are going the deep academic route, they're like, it's just time. Like there's a lot of memorization, but you shed a lot. You know?
Yeah,
like,
it's not necessarily like you have to be super smart to do this. It's like you have to like be interested in what you're doing, I think. That's what I think it is.
I have kudos for you, man. Kudos to you for just like being like, drugs are cool. I'm gonna learn about how the brain works.
Yeah, that's always. Should we just get into it? Should we just like?
Yeah, we're started.
Let's start. Yeah,
Let's do it.
But yeah, I guess that came from like a pretty early age. I think the first time I smoked pot, I was like 15 or 16. I was always interested in trying that sort of thing. And then the deeper dive was, I'd smoke pot like once a week with my friends at their house on a Friday night in high school. And then that it never progressed. It's kind of stayed at like once a week for a while. And then I became more interested from like reading, about trip reports on Arrowhead. I don't know if people still use Arrowhead for that stuff. But I used to read trip reports on Arrowhead, and then I, became, for some reason, really interested in trying psychedelics like LSD. And then when I did, I just got this immense I guess it dawned on me that like this is just a molecule changing my consciousness. And ever since then, I was like, I want to study chemistry, I want to study pharmacology, and just really dive into this stuff. But only really with the care about like psychedelic drugs is really what I'm honestly trying to pursue as like a career.
Are you recording the screen
Yeah, we're recording everything.
on Skype and everything also?
Yeah. It's good.
How come it doesn't say it? Oh, it does.
Yeah,
Stop.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's good.
I just got. It's funny because I had a similar revelation. It didn't lead me to like getting a PhD, but I went the first time I took salvia. That knocked me out of my body, and like, not in an out of body experience, but like an out of person experience. Like I was just gone. I was not me. I was in another realm, a whole other set of memories, a whole other set of perspectives and perceptions. Like it was another dimension. It wasn't even like another 3D like relatable plane kind of thing. And then I just popped back into this reality, and I had like that kind of what's that story of the butterfly? Like the guy dreams he's a butterfly, and he's like, is the butterfly dreaming me, or am I dreaming the butterfly? Like which one is more real?
Yeah.
And I just had that moment. I was
Yeah.
I smoked a plant. That sounds weird already, but like then it just deleted my life for like 15 minutes.
That's it. And the same thing happened with me when I did mushrooms in 2012. Like, I was under the impression that it would be like, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing. So it was under the impression that it would be just a chill room, and we'd just see like an elephant pop up, and we'd all laugh and point at each other, and then it would disappear.
Yeah.
And then we did it, the room kind of turned into this something else, and I realized, holy fuck, my perception of reality is shifting. And that was like what I got out of it. I'm like, I thought physical 3D reality is how it is, and then this substance just morphed this whole thing that I thought was right, what it was supposed to be, and it just blew my mind from that day forward.
Yeah, everybody.
I totally feel you.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a
Remember
weird.
having that?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No.
I guess I remember having that same revelation of like, this is a molecule, and a molecule in my world is it's a tiny thing, but it's three-dimensional. And this tiny molecule that's a three-dimensional thing is somehow affecting like my perception of reality, and pretty much the same thing you're talking about. It's wild.
Yeah, it's totally wild. It's just you eat a mushroom that's growing naturally outside, and then your entire reality just shifts, and you're like, what the fuck? And then you have all these thought processes. And I'm so happy you're on, because you're going to go behind the science behind all of it, and kind of explain the interactions. And like, for us, we just take it and experience it on the experiential level. But to really understand it, that's fascinating.
And it's funny because I wouldn't even say like there's always new stuff in the field, and I wouldn't say I fully understand it. I have like a concept of like how the drugs interact with parts of your brain, but there's still like there's like something missing, and the missing piece is, I think, like it's something in like cognitive like psychology or cognitive neuroscience that's like there's a missing piece still. And we'll get into that, what that, why that is, and
Yeah, there's
the
this kind
ramifications
of
that.
there's this crazy like Venn diagram when it comes to psychedelics, where there's this mystical, spiritual, religious, and then very deeply for sure psychological, and then obviously just straight up chemical. Just understanding the biology and the chemistry behind it, and there's no, obviously from academic point of view, there's no reason to take any of those legs out of that table. Like there'd be an almost like a school just for psychedelics, and a lot of like we talk to people who have like centers, and they'll offer psilocybin or ibogaine or something, and they as their practice grows, they're like, yes, we had a nurse, now we have an actual physician, now we also have a trip assistant, or like a straight up psychologist on or a therapist of some kind, like on staff. So it's like more and more trying to plug the leaks, because this is just like some kind of human experience thing, and there's no avenue that's not worth like exploring, I guess.
Isn't that amazing that now it's like pulling in all these practices into one center for a treatment for someone? It's like whereas suppose you would go to like a psychologist, talk to them, get a prescription or whatever, a psychiatrist. Now you go to these centers, you take a substance, you have like a nurse, you have a psychologist, you have like a coach, you have like, all these people are like forming a team to just cater to everything. And you probably even have like a spiritual person to speak to, like a spiritual guide who can relate to some of these things that you've encountered and might have a better relation in some things,
And they're all rubbing off on each other, like all these
and
practices
then they have your dossier
under one.
They have your dossier after, like, okay, well, maybe they can work better with you, and then you have like this full team for your psychological state. I'm excited for the future of medicine in terms of this,
Yeah, totally. It's I'm really happy that like I feel like there's been, I guess, like in my recent experience, like a boom in psychedelic research and people wanting to talk about it and explore it for medical avenues. It's becoming like pretty big.
Yes.
It's gaining a lot of steam. There's all the, the MAPS clinical trials. MDMA is now stage 3 for post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of the soldiers coming back with like PTSD from war, and psilocybin is phase 2 for depression, major depressive disorder. It's like it's becoming a very real reality.
Yeah, it's insane. It's really, because I talked about this with Sammy so many times, but back in 2012, 2011, like I was talking to people about ayahuasca and stuff, and people would just head scratch me. What the fuck are you talking about? And now today, if I bring it up, literally almost anyone I encounter has heard about it, has done it, or has a family member or a distant cousin, but they've heard about the term ayahuasca and mushrooms and all these things. So there's definitely like a resurgence,
Yeah, for sure. It's becoming like big in popular culture, and I am curious. Have either of you guys tried ayahuasca? I've never taken ayahuasca.
Oh, yeah.
You both have? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Or ibogaine or no? I know ibogaine's
No.
more of a purging thing for people use for addiction. But
I'm interested
so what
in iboga,
did you take ayahuasca like here? Oh, I mean in Canada, or do you go down to the rainforest? Or I guess maybe you can't disclose, but whatever.
We don't have to get into big detail, I
But
guess, about anything.
It's not too far off, though. I'll just leave that detail.
Yeah,
But
fair
it's
enough.
definitely-
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, it's definitely not in our area, but it's not far.
Yeah.
That's
nice.
Yeah, it's closer than Peru or something, but it's still very much had like a I'd say almost pretty much religious context,
Yeah.
like a very, very ceremonial, very.
Yeah.
And I always say on the podcast, a lot of the experience was that, and
Yes.
I only did it once, so I can kind of like latch on to my experience, and it's a little more. What's that word? But it's like I haven't had a lot of experiences, so it feels like less.
Yeah, it's very clear in a way. It's less
Yeah.
like muffled by other experiences. And
This
I
guy's
guess.
done it like a dozen times or more at this point.
Yeah,
so I don't-
something like that, allegedly.
Did you,
That's it.
did
You have more of a
both go-
flavor.
Did you both throw up on it? A lot of people puke on ayahuasca.
Oh,
I
yeah.
did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Many
It's
times.
just fart. Yeah, many times.
It's
It's like
not
you
what anyone
puke and
thinks it
then you
is.
trip.
That's unfortunately the one that stains the term ayahuasca. People are
Yeah, it
associated directly to
does, yeah.
purging, but the purge, I'm telling you, is the best part about the experience.
True. And is it like it's supposedly you drink it, you purge, and then you start to chirp really hard.
It
So it's
depends.
like-
It depends.
Depends.
Yeah, some
I feel like if
trips. Sorry.
uncomfortable throwing while you're tripping. I guess it's not for whatever reason.
You know what I describe it as? Like if you're ever taking LSD or psilocybin or anything, you have that moment at some point where you're like extremely sober, like you're tripping and
Yes.
you're in the room, maybe you're alone or you're with friends or something, and you're suddenly just a guy in a room with friends. Like there's nothing else. Even if you have the visuals or maybe some emotional like fluctuations, you're suddenly like very aware that you're like where you are and who you are, and there's almost something. Maybe it depends on your set and setting kind of thing, but it almost feels gross or heavy, you know.
Yeah,
And
I know this feeling. The gross. I felt that definitely on psychedelics for
Yes.
a brief moment in time. Totally.
I feel like everyone I say it, they're like yeah. Like it kind of
I
rings
get
a bell,
that.
and I feel like the puking is like a long drawn out feeling of that. Like this
Interesting.
rising. There's a word when you're taking drugs, but like, you know, that the coming
The
up
come
kind
up.
of,
The come up.
that's literally called it. So that's for me, that started happening, and then I started feeling sick, and then it was kind of stuck, and then I had like rapé shot up my nose that like helped me puke.
Oh wow.
And
wow.
yeah, that was
Oh
fun.
my God.
And it was actually really good, like in a psychological way, to feel like more vulnerable around everybody, and then to also in some weird like medicinal spiritual way, I got like something came out of me, something I didn't need anymore, some kind of thing, some kind of parasitic entity got the fuck out kind of thing. So that's a whole other conversation, but it was
Sure.
Oh,
the buzz, whatever you want to call. I feel stupid even calling it that, but the psychedelic feeling is very.
I know what you mean.
It moves. It moves a lot.
Yeah.
It can feel intense one moment, and then suddenly feel the same but not intense. It can suddenly go like really low, and you're kind of in your body again. But then you have a kind of ethereal feeling in your mind, or a floaty happiness, or like it really moves around, and it's just moving the goalposts all the time, but like in a good way. So you're like always scoring, or never scoring. I don't know. It's like an ego trip, right? So.
yeah.
There is a way to explain this. There's this idea that comes out of Carl Harris group called entropic brain theory, and it's a model that's used to describe a psychedelic state. But basically, it says that in a psychedelic state, your brain goes through a lot of entropy and a lot of disorder. So I think it speaks to what you're talking about, where you have this very like ever-changing landscape of psychedelics, where there's a lot of like disorder in the experience.
I like using the word entropy because I picture like a system of like atoms or something. I picture I apply it to the physical world, so there is
That's
this kind of
that's good.
yeah, but I liken it to a dream in that like your brain, parts of your brain are randomly turning on and off essentially. So you're going to have this like collection of the self, and then something additional, and then you'll have this disillusion of the self, and who knows what when that's happening. So it's this constant like I don't know if it's as organized as contraction and like contract and expand.
It's not. It's not very organized. No.
But it's something.
No.
It's not that linear, but it's something like that, right? It's
like if you look at like EEGs that come off. So basically, like you can look at the brain patterns of somebody tripping on psychedelics, and a normal brain pattern will show like normal like spikes and like normal minima. So maximum, minimum, maximum, minimum. They go up and down very synchronously. It's called synchronous brain synchronization. But in psychedelics, you see this it's called asynchronous brain synchronization, where you can't actually predict the spikes and you can't predict the peaks and the lows. You like can't predict the brain pattern, which is interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and we don't know like how to predict the model. Like people don't know yet how to predict that model, and people are like working on this. Like how can we predict these brain patterns using mathematics? And nothing's worked yet.
what would be the point of predicting it? What is that?
The idea of predicting is that you can understand the experience in terms of like a neuronal level. It's to be able to understand like what is the mechanism under which this is working, and oftentimes people use mathematical models to be able to predict it, so that they can say like, oh, it's doing this, but because we can't predict it, we don't really know.
Do we know after the fact? Like if you're looking at this EEG and you're seeing the ups and downs, are these like specific? Is this like specific activity in specific parts of the brain, so you can still after the fact kind of tell what someone's experiencing, quote unquote? That's interesting.
Yeah, it's not like a global brain thing. It's very specific brain regions. A lot of people look at. You can look at like whole brain EEGs, but in this psychedelic world, it's not as like functional to do it. It's not as important to do it. It's more important to look at specific structures.
Are there like umbrella categories of experience, sort of like the religious experience, like the kind of dissolution of ego, or the bad trips? Like, are there things you can actually read and be like, oh, that's this, and that's what
probably. I would guess there are. I haven't seen anything personally yet, like in the literature that tries to describe it. But like as we progress more and more in science, we'll be able to like figure these things out. But that would be interesting. Like, you know, in a really simple manner, like one of the brain regions that's responsible for like fear, right? Fear extinction is your amygdala. Your amygdala becomes, you know, heavily active when you're in a very fear-induced state. So I'd imagine that in a psychedelic state where somebody like is very scared and afraid, you'd see like more activity in the amygdala. So you can kind of use the normal brain function to predict these sorts of things.
I don't want to pick your. I don't want you to like. I don't want to turn this into a lecture, but I'm curious. Like,
no, it's fine. No, I don't mind the lecture style stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Like, is there a norm that's like an average, or does everyone's brain regions more or less like function the same way and communicate to each other the same way, or are there kind of like big variations there?
For the most part, it's pretty like this occurs in everyone's brain. If you wanna get it down to like that level of science, yeah, like the average brain would do this. But like, of course, there's always variance when you're doing any measurement, and we always measure those variable changes from person to person when you run an experiment, and you call that just an error, like your standard error between people. And it's usually not that much between people. Standard error is usually not that like wide of a margin.
Okay.
So it's like because
Deviance.
we all have human brains and we're all humans and we all have like serotonin receptor and we all have a basic similar structure of our brain and our neural networks, they all function pretty much very similarly, I'd say.
And this is what you're studying specifically, right? Is like a specific set of serotonin receptors that are responsible for.
Yeah, we can get into that. Yeah, so
yes, please.
I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm like a pharmacologist / chemist, and what I specifically, I'll get into what I really study and what I'm interested in studying. What I really study is I work for a guy that does cannabis research. So we try and design or look for novel drugs from cannabis that can be used to treat seizures. Seizures specifically in adolescents that are like between 5 and 10 years old. This is a type of seizure that causes something called absence epilepsy in younger kids, and unfortunately epilepsy is really bad for your brain, and a lot of kids who have these aggressive seizures don't live very long lives. So we're looking for drugs from cannabis that can be used to treat epilepsy, and what the research group I work with has found that is if you combine CBD and THC, it reduces epilepsy by about 50%. But the ratio of CBD to THC is about 9 parts CBD, 1 part THC. And what's interesting is that they've tried the concoction with just CBD and it doesn't work. You need like a little bit of THC for the seizures to actually be eliminated.
Do you know why? Is there like something observed there?
We don't know, like from a pharmacological level, like very small molecular level. No, we don't know why. There must be some interaction between CBD and THC inside of the receptor that's like doing this. But we don't really know why, but we know that it works, and that's really cool. But specifically my role in this project is to understand these from a molecular level. So I look at like the 3-dimensional shape of a molecule, for example, THC or CBD, and then I look at the 3-dimensional shape of the receptor that it binds to, which is called cannabinoid receptor type 1. And the way to think about these very abstract ideas is think about like a baseball glove and a baseball. A baseball glove is much bigger than a baseball, and when you catch a baseball inside of a baseball glove, you use your hand to kind of modulate the shape of that pocket, right? So somebody throws you a ball and you catch it. And in this analogy, the baseball glove is the receptor and the drug is the baseball. And the idea here being that in a molecular level, when receptors and drugs interact, they interact in very specific ways. For example, basically like some part of the molecule will interact with some part of the receptor, and the parts of the receptor are basically, receptors are made of amino acids. They're collections of different amino acids. So like some molecule on one of those amino acids, or a few of those amino acids, will interact with some molecules inside of the drug. And I really try and look at what are the exact molecular interactions between the receptor and the drug, if that makes sense.
I have 100 questions, but it makes sense so far. Like, so are there different molecules interacting with different parts of the receptor to give different effects?
Yeah, so basically you can think about it like this. So what's really interesting is that let's use serotonin receptor, because that's usually the one that gets a lot of play in psychedelics and the one I'm more interested in. So serotonin receptors have 14 different subtypes, meaning that look at the shape of a baseball glove, and for example, if I had a baseball glove and you had a baseball glove, they'd probably look the same, but they'd have slightly different shapes because they're different baseball gloves. Much like serotonin has different subtypes of receptors. And sorry, I totally forgot your question.
Yeah.
I was just rambling.
I asked if it's a obscure.
No, it's probably a good question.
Well, I asked if there are, because you're saying like the specific molecule coming in interacts with one of the amino acids that make up the receptor. So I was asking if different molecules will interact with different parts of the receptor.
That is exactly, you have that right.
Okay, cool.
So what's
that.
interesting about that is you have serotonin receptors and you also have serotonin the molecule. And in your body, the reason that you have serotonin receptor is so that serotonin the molecule, the neurotransmitter, can bind to it. And that's how it modulates the effects, right? And conserved in every one of these receptors, which is really fascinating, is a specific receptor site. And the specific receptor site is called an orthosteric binding site. And the role of this orthosteric binding site is so that whenever serotonin molecule comes in, it always binds to the exact same site, and it's never going to change. And these orthosteric binding sites are conserved among like all of these different receptors that our body makes. So, and what's interesting about your question is that if a drug has a different interaction with a different part of the receptor, it'll produce different effects. Which is pretty crazy.
That was like a follow-up question. What if the same molecule lands in a different way? So you can have I picture it like a net, and it's catching like a rainfall of molecules. So you're like the melange of effects is going to kind of create the overarching like trip, essentially.
Yeah.
So each molecule has like a couple of ways that it gets you high in a couple of receptors or one specific receptor, and then that creates a mush trip or a salvia trip or a ayahuasca trip or whatever.
Yeah.
That's fucked.
You're asking really interesting questions that get really deep into pharmacology, which is interesting because if we go a little bit deeper, when a drug goes into a receptor, it's actually constantly moving inside the receptor. So receptor is always like vibrating and moving, and a molecule is always vibrating and moving. And basically, when they interact, the molecule is looking for how am I going to be the happiest? And a molecule is the happiest when it's at the lowest energy state. So molecules can adopt certain shapes that are put it in a really high energy state, and molecules can adopt shapes that want to put it in a really low energy state. And it kind of is, as you say, it's like a mixture of those different states the molecule's adapting. It's an average of those that is the effect of the drug.
That is so cool. It's like Plinko. It's like this. It's like I thought it was like Lego, but it's like this thing hits and kind of connects, and it's like maybe like a messy Velcro, and it just kind of keeps wiggling until it connects more and more and more, and like that is so cool.
When you first learn about this stuff that I study, you think about it as these freeze frame things, as like a drug being like this three-dimensional thing that doesn't move, and a receptor being a three-dimensional thing that doesn't move, and they kind of just clicking together like Legos. And that's what you're taught when you first learn pharmacology. But then you're like, oh no, the receptor is actually always like shifting and moving a little bit into these different like high and low energy states, and the molecule is always shifting into these high and low energy states. And when they interact, they're both vibrating in these high and low energy states. And the effect of the drug is really the average of all of those high energy states that it's adopting. But in reality, it's going to have the effect of the low energy state more than the high energy state, because the drug will be in a low energy state more than it would be in a high energy state.
Once it's locked in, it's like it stops wiggling, essentially. I don't know. I'd put it in like a layman term.
It's always, basically. So it kind of gets locked in, and it's still vibrating, and it doesn't want to go to a high energy state anymore, so it kind of stays in this low energy state inside the receptor, kind of just wiggling.
This might be a stupid question, but is this receptor solely for that molecule, or is it for other things as well?
So I guess that's an interesting thing to bring up. So if we take serotonin receptor is specifically for serotonin. Yeah, they're very specific. Okay. Dopamine receptor, would have the compound dopamine coming to bind into it. Okay. Cannabinoid receptor would have the cannabinoid ones are actually a little bit different. It's not called like cannabinoid drug. There's two of them. They're called 2-AG and AEA, 2-arachidonyl glycerol and anandamide are the two. They're called the ones that basically they're the molecules that your body naturally synthesizes for the role of binding to these receptors. Okay. And cannabinoid receptor has two of them, which is kind of unique about cannabinoid receptor. But serotonin receptor just has one, which is serotonin.
Okay. So when we're introducing these drugs, they're kind of like these molecules, like they're not supposed to fit perfectly?
I mean, I don't know if that's the right thing to say, like supposed to or not.
I know, I felt dirty saying it, yeah.
Yeah, the fact is that they do fit. They do fit inside these receptor subtypes. So for example, like a lot of drugs fit inside of serotonin receptor that produce psychedelic effects. LSD, psilocybin, the Mdma compounds, if you guys have heard of these compounds, like 2CE, 2CI, mescaline. Ayahuasca contains DMT, which also sits inside this receptor. And if you want to make it even more complicated and more messy than we've already made it,
let's do it.
Most drugs don't just bind to one receptor, right? So, for example, let's go for a kind of a messy one. LSD. LSD doesn't just bind to serotonin receptor. It also binds to dopamine receptors. Okay. Right? So the interesting part is that drugs don't just have a mechanism of action because they bind to one receptor subtype. They bind to multiple receptors and multiple receptor subtypes. The reason that serotonin 2A receptor gets the most press in the field of psychedelic research is because it has the highest likelihood to bind to a serotonin receptor. So for example, if you had 100 serotonin receptors, let's say if you have like 90 serotonin receptors, if you have LSD, it's going to bind to like 90 serotonin receptors and 10 dopamine receptors. So you say the primary mechanism is where it binds to the most amount of receptors.
So then if there's something maybe like ecstasy, like MDMA, like that's probably flipped, like it's more dopamine related?
Yeah, it's more just dopamine related.
So you can predict a bit, or maybe a lot, like the high, like the feeling, like the overall.
You can. And so what's interesting about a lot of medications is medications have side effects, right? And medications have side effects because pharmacology is like still becoming more advanced. And in our infancy stage of pharmacology, we don't necessarily understand how to make one drug bind to just one receptor. We have like one drug that binds to a few different receptors, and it binding to those other receptors is what creates those side effects. But we don't know how to really engineer a drug that can just bind to one receptor only. And we're getting better at that.
I never thought of it like a man versus nature kind of thing. Like nature's got this beautiful complex molecule that like almost is serotonin to the point where it jumps into those receptors and sometimes other receptors like you're saying. But then we're trying to make a molecule like homegrown style, like in a few years instead of a few millennia. And obviously, like I've heard a lot of. I'm not in these fields at all. I'm just a curious chimp, as we say. But I had to. I'm sorry. Sorry, not sorry. But
No, it's good.
My point is that what was my point? I lost it a bit. What were we talking about? Damn you, curious chimp joke! You ruined my brain.
I do this too. I'm forgetful a lot too, and I tend to like.
Well, it's a
go
lot
on
of
tangents
info
and
altogether.
stuff.
What was I gonna
It
say?
is.
We were talking about molecules and
You started off with you were not in this field. It was a curiosity or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you
Actually,
were. It was. Yeah, it was maybe something about you were trying to say like nature's really complex and creates all those beautiful molecules. But
right. Thank you.
you were
Yeah,
saying-
I've heard a lot of professionals, some people who are like maybe a little more weary about pharmaceuticals in general. I heard that. That was a good crack.
Thanks.
That was and so it's described as like indiscriminate, like you're saying, like you're showering the brain with a molecule and kind of hoping, and that's weird when a doctor is like in the corner, fingers crossed, like, hey, maybe this will make you worse, maybe it'll make you better, maybe it'll make you better, but you'll also be depressed, or you'll be tired, or you'll be brain foggy, or they don't really know what's going to happen, and it's like your chemistry versus this simple molecule. So it's like maybe this other drug, try Xanax instead of citalopram or whatever they're called. Like
exactly.
so it's like a trial and error, whereas it's more ubiquitous. The experience is more ubiquitous with like let's call them plant medicines or like these new like MDMA, psilocybin, DMT, etc. Because they're so complex that they kind of match our complexity and then they actually function better. It's like it's like the form of a question, but I guess I just answered it myself.
Yeah. It's what you're saying. There's a term. There's an idea on this in pharmacology, and the idea basically is that you can smoke cannabis and you'll have an effect from smoking cannabis, or you can smoke something really high concentrated THC like oil. You can dab, right? And those two intoxications are going to be different, right? Whether you smoke a concentrate or the plant material. So basically, the cannabis plant material contains about 120 different molecules that will contribute to you being intoxicated or high. And we call this the entourage effect in the field.
Did you say 120?
What's that?
Did you say 120?
Yeah, cannabis plant has about 120 different cannabinoids that will produce intoxication. But what's interesting is they refer to this effect of 120 different molecules as the entourage effect. The way to think about it is like, I think about it like you ever hear like you go to a show and you hear a symphony play or like a band or something, and you have like all these instruments playing at once, and that creates like one global sound that you can listen to, or you can hear somebody play a solo, and that's just one instrument. So the analogy is that like the one molecule having the effect like THC is like one instrument playing a solo. And the effect of cannabis plant is like the whole symphony playing. It has this global effect to it. And we refer to that as entourage effect, and it can be extrapolated to any drug. For example, like we can even say ayahuasca. Ayahuasca contains the oral active compounds DMT, but it also contains other alkaloids or other compounds that will produce an intoxication. On the contrary, you can take DMT by itself or smoke DMT, and that has a different effect. So it's the idea that nature has designed all of these plants to have many different compounds, and that has an effect. But what we do as pharmacologists is we isolate one of those molecules to figure out how it works inside the human brain, right?
I would love to get into why. Well, I know it a little bit, but the DMT, orally taking the DMT versus smoking it has a completely different effect. Maybe it would be interesting to go into the science behind that and why that does that. Because isn't it the same molecule in the end of the day, or is there more?
Yeah, it's actually, this actually applies. The question you're asking actually applies for any drug, which is interesting. So when you take a drug and you take it orally, it first has to go into your stomach, right? And then the acid from your stomach will bioconvert that drug into something else. And the whole process of bioconverting a drug is so that you can pee it out. That's really all of the goal of this. Your liver converts. Your liver is going to take that drug and convert into something that's more what we say polar, and it can be peed out. And your kidneys filter it. But basically, taking a drug orally, it takes longer for it to get into your bloodstream and then into your brain. But when you smoke a drug, it goes instantly into your lungs, and then from your lungs it goes right into your bloodstream. So it happens much faster. It takes a shorter period of time for the blood to get into your bloodstream and then to your brain. So that really applies for any drug. So I'd imagine, like, it's interesting that smoking DMT is popular and taking ayahuasca is popular, but like, what DMT is, you're smoking a psychedelic. It's one of the only psychedelic drugs that you actually smoke, right? I don't know that. Well, people smoke 5-methoxy DMT, which is the toad venom one, and that's also really potent.
Yeah.
But if you were to probably take that 5-methoxy DMT in an oral pill or an oral way, it would be not as intense of an effect. But basically, when you smoke it, it gets to your bloodstream faster, and the concentration goes up really high and then down really fast. So it has a very short mechanism of action.
Yeah.
But when you orally take it, it stays in your bloodstream for a longer period of time, then kind of crashes down.
What I find beautiful about ayahuasca is that it has the MAO inhibitors that activate.
Yeah, MAOI inhibitor.
And that's some pretty complex chemistry, right? To combine those two. And supposedly they figured that out about 4,000 years ago, combining the two plants.
That's always kind of mind-blowing.
That one has to stick because that is
mind-blowing.
Yeah, because if you ingested the ayahuasca without that inhibitor, it would have just been digested and pissed out and probably no effect.
I always enjoy picturing them just mixing everything, like early life, like a less complicated but still fairly advanced civilization, and they're just like playing Minecraft. They're like, what if I mix this and that, this and that, this and that, this and that, and then one day they find this mixture, or like they would say is that like you find something that starts kind of talking to you, and then it starts telling you like, yo, go try this toad.
Well, that's what they say
with that bark. Yeah, that's exactly.
That's the legend behind ayahuasca, is that the plant medicines taught them how to make this brew. But the complex thing about this brew is it's that it's in an abundance of plants and vines and also there's over 100,000 species of plants in the Amazon, that these two combinations, one turns off that system and the other one allows the DMT to be activated. That's fucking statistically, if they're doing trial and error, we're talking in the lottery numbers here.
Yeah, out of all those plant species, they just happen to find the two. It's pretty crazy, and it makes you wonder too, like what else is out there in the Amazon rainforest that's probably like a psychoactive compound.
I wanted to ask you since you're much more in the field, like, is there anything kind of like similar to ayahuasca or DMT?
Not,
even?
Like, I mean, synthetic, yeah. I mean, there's I was just looking at this today. There's no reason I know this right now, but
cool.
There are these. You can basically make DMT derivatives. So. DMT is called dimethyltryptamine. The reason it's called dimethyltryptamine structurally is because it has two methyl groups coming off of a nitrogen, and the core backbone of the structure is a tryptamine. But you can also make diethyltryptamine, where you take, instead of methyl groups, you have ethyl groups coming off of it. And then you can have dipropyltryptamine, which is a 3-carbon chain. And then you can have diisopropyltryptamine, which is an isopropyl group. So yeah, I mean, these don't occur in nature though. These compounds, these other ones, these are synthetically made.
And people have like tried these in a psychedelic.
People have. There's actually like papers on. I mean, there's papers studying the relationship between the structure and the activity of the drug. And I think, I don't know if. I mean, they're in the literature a lot. And you can read them in publications. I don't know if I've read a trip report about somebody like taking diisopropyltryptamine or like diethyltryptamine or anything. But I mean, they're compounds that are like. I guess I've only seen them in papers where they're testing their activity in cells, not people.
Okay.
How do they function inside of a cell? But I would imagine you could probably get them somewhere. There's all the research chemicals going around.
There's probably a big stamp on the front that says like, "Don't smoke this, you freaking hippie." Like, we don't know what it's gonna do.
I may or may not know about these research chemicals.
Like whenever you buy any research chemical, it always has that not for human consumption label. If you look at the pictures on Reddit that people post, not for human consumption.
That always scares me a bit because they're not made for human consumption. Even though it could easily be consumed, there might be some little like check of quality or some extra like a preservative or something weird. Like
it's way better than your backyard or alleyway drug dealer.
That's a good point.
I agree with
That's
It's
a
way
good.
better.
You're taking a chance
Yeah.
regardless.
It's safer. Yeah.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Yeah,
how-
but your drug dealer doesn't want to kill you.
yeah, but he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
That's true, but the other guys know what they're doing and they think that you're
Your
not consuming it.
Your drug dealer's got a fucking Grateful Dead t-shirt on and he stinks. And he's just cooking up
chopping-
something. He's
yeah.
like, fuck, it looks good, sell it.
Everything's cut. It's DMT somehow cut with like cocaine. or
Yeah,
something.
he literally the week before he was making cocaine or something.
And it's like still in the bowl or something. It's like a residue. That's actually, I don't know if you know how this works. I was actually contemplating this the other day because when I was younger I did a bunch of drugs like a fucking idiot. You know, like a lot of us have.
Yeah.
It's just the growing
Fair
pains
enough.
of being a human.
Growing pains.
So that's the only way I could describe
Yeah.
it. But I'm just curious because we're talking about like absorption through the lungs and why it's faster and stuff.
Sure.
Like, I used to think I would snort cocaine, just for example, or ketamine, and choose your fucking powder of choice. Pick your poison, I guess, would have been a better thing to say. So why does I'm inhaling a crystal? Like, what the fuck? I don't know how that
Yeah.
works. Is that
Yeah,
just
like,
rubbing
when
up
you-
against my mucous membrane and like going into my blood?
Exactly.
Really?
When you blow, nose is actually, although you've seen people with really messed up septums from blowing a lot of cocaine, like where they have like no septum in the middle, the nose is actually a really good surface for absorbing a drug, which is why people blow cocaine or blow drugs. But yeah, exactly. There's a mucous membrane inside of your nose, and that mucous membrane has a lot of entrance areas into your bloodstream, basically.
But
Yeah.
then isn't the rest just going into like my lungs?
Likely, yeah, because a lot of people talk about the drip thing or whatever down the throat or whatever. They'll like have that like drip or whatever.
Yeah, like it's stuck up there, and you kind of end up swallowing some
For
of
sure,
it.
you're getting
Yeah,
particles.
Yeah.
But I mean, but that's still gonna become active inside of your bloodstream, even if it goes into your stomach.
Oh yeah,
That'll
yeah.
still like undergo different types of metabolism, or it'll first get chewed up by acids in your stomach instead of going right into the mucous membranes in your nose. So it will have an effect. It's not really a waste of drug or anything, but there's a different effect.
It's so crazy to think. I don't know, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy. It's like when you study any field to like a deep level, it becomes really trippy and really psychedelic. I think it becomes really like interesting and weird and has all these just bizarre things, right?
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, even just in terms of anatomy as a massage therapist, like going deep into that, you just start your mind starts melting, realizing how complex everything's happening. It's like at the it's completely like a psychedelic experience because at the 3D reality looks normal, and then when you start peeling the layers, when you take a psychedelic, you start seeing, you feel things differently. You feel gravity all of a sudden. So when you're studying a field and you go deeper into the anatomy, for my sake, it's just like you're uncovering these systems that are operating like that, and we're just never really aware of it. So,
But it's always been there.
It's
and then
always been- it's like-
now you have like an extra set of eyes, almost like you have that
Yes.
feeling of revealing more.
and then once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's just now it's part of your just like you can't unsee all the science you've learned. It's just there now. It's just part of you.
Yeah.
This is weird. Can I ask you both for examples of something weird, like deeper in your professions? Like I'd love to know
Yeah,
in terms
totally.
of like
Yeah.
what's some weird ass thing, because you're learning about like the drugs humans take essentially.
Yeah.
So that there must be some fucked up like things you've learned or stories, or there must be a lot of myths flying around also that you know are not true.
Yeah, totally. You brought up this idea of like what's one of the weirdest things you've ever like learned, and it's actually not even psychedelic drug related. It's about like deep chemistry and physics. So there's a branch in physics and chemistry called quantum chemistry or physical chemistry, and it studies how really small things called electrons move around. So basically, as you make a system smaller and smaller and smaller, like you and I, we're people. We walk across the room normally, and our feet pass through every point of the three-dimensional space and going from one end of the room to the other. But when you make something smaller and smaller and smaller, and it becomes a quantum mechanical system, even smaller than a molecule is an electron. An electron is one of the more fundamental small things in physics and fundamental particles that you can encounter. And electrons are super weird. they don't travel in these like discrete motions of like A to B. They like teleport from one destination to the other. So if an electron were to walk across the room, unlike me, it would just like, you would see it like occur in these discrete these time points. You would see it like in one location, the next location, the next location. You wouldn't see it as a continuous thing moving. You'd see it as just appearing across the room, kind of like if you were to turn on like lights in like a really big warehouse, and you kind of see it like all like flicker on, like really stacked like that. That's sort of one of the weirdest things I ever learned in science, and it's not even drug related.
Can I get into why that occurs?
I don't know. I don't think I know enough like physical chemistry to tell you why it occurs, but it just seems to behave that, like they always say that there's this thing called wave particle duality in physics, and it basically says that as a molecule gets smaller and smaller and smaller, it goes from having like, it normally has a linear, we walk linear from one to the other, but as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, it develops what are called wave-like properties, where instead of moving discrete motions, it kind of does like this. It kind of has these oscillations. Okay. And for whatever reason, you know, if you saw the wave-like particle nature of an electron, you'd see it move across the room going like up and down and up and down. But what's weird is that you see it occur in these discrete motions. And there's this really weird thing in physics called quantum tunneling. And it says that for whatever reason, it does this oscillation, but you can't see it. You just see it as like appearing from one spot to the next. But in reality, it's oscillating up and down.
It's almost like it's going up and down in like some weird 4-dimensional way that we don't get. So it's like popping in and out.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what it makes you think that like we are people. We see like arguably a 2.5 or 3-dimensional space. But if an electron is moving in a 4-dimensional space, you can't see it. You can only see it in a 3-dimensional space.
That's it. It's
so it could be that. It could be that it's actually moving like in a dimension that we can't see.
I always thought of it as I mean, I'm trying to rationalize this because I've learned a bit about quantum physics and like just the end result, you know, just the Michio Kaku talking points kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah, totally fine.
But it's like volatile. Oh, sorry?
That's what it could be. I agree with you. It could be this, like, it's actually in a higher dimension that we don't perceive.
Or lower or something, like some kind of flatland thing.
I think it's likely probably higher, because if you think about, like, we would be able to see a one-dimensional thing. We would just see it, like, move in a line. Like, we would be able to see one-dimensional things. And we'd be able to see two-dimensional things because we can see width, right? So one dimension is a line, and you can see lines. And 2 dimensions is, length and width. So it's just like a box without any depth. So I think likely it's, like, oscillating in a higher dimension that we don't see as 3-dimensional beings.
It makes the most sense.
Well, sure.
I don't know,
we know, right? Exactly. But you know what's funny is that this bleeds into like this extra dimensional multiversal kind of conversation, and that's a lot. That's like essentially where you're going when you take drugs. Like
it sure feels that way. There's things that you can't comprehend back in 3D space after the trip, but in the trip it's just so clear. Terence McKenna says it all the time. It's like liquid gold dripping through your hands. Like you can't catch on to any of the things that you're grasping. You can only experience it, and then when you come back, you're like, I saw a light, I saw this shape, but it's nothing of what you're explaining.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's like our language, the way our language is developed, it's developed for like normal states of consciousness. You're able to speak in terms of normal consciousness. Our language isn't developed to describe like right?
Oh, you broke up.
Really like entropy, chaotic state.
You're just cutting out a little bit. I don't know what happened there.
That's okay. Is it okay now? I saw the same thing on your screen. It cut out.
We hear you again, but now there we go.
Oh yeah, we're good.
The video caught up.
Yeah,
we're good. That's fine.
A little Wi-Fi glitch. Yeah.
Technical issues.
Just hit the side of it like we did in the 90s.
Yeah, no more dial-up internet, right?
Yeah.
That sound gives me PTSD.
Oh,
People joke about it.
You call someone and it's like,
yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
I should put that as my ringtone. Imagine every time someone calls you.
I'm trying to call my friend.
Yeah, that's it. Close the phone. Yeah. I need to use the phone.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I used that joke in Futurama. It was so funny because it's like 1,000 years in the future. It's like, can you guys get off the internet? I need to use the phone.
Yeah, but
what I was saying is that like our language isn't catered to the fact. It's catered to our normal state of consciousness. It's not based off of a psychedelic world. So like trying to use words that are not for a psychedelic state to explain it becomes really confusing.
Exactly.
You know, like imagine if we lived in a world where like our normalcy was like tripping all the time. You know, like imagine what houses would look like and what like cell phones would look like and what like how people would interact if we were just constantly in that state. It'd probably be a really like colorful world, but
It'd be pretty cool.
I can't stop
but-
playing.
I
that
think
out.
Burning Man is getting closer and closer to that translation.
yeah.
You know?
It's Burning Man's like a competing society, like a version of reality that's just trying to like come into existence. Maybe like
Have you guys been to Burning Man?
I was
No.
planning on it either this year or next year, but this year's obviously out of the question. So,
Totally,
yeah.
yeah.
Have you been?
I haven't. I have a friend that lives in San Francisco, and he goes with a big group, and I want to go with him one of these years.
It looks
maybe,
incredible.
like, it looks so great.
Yeah,
it looks
man.
so fantastic.
Hey, fuck, I want to go so bad. And I don't know if you've
Yeah.
seen this aerial photo of it at night. It's like the shape of a fucking galaxy. It's just a spiral of lights, and in the middle, just a beam. I guess that's the Burning Man. And it's people who are listening, I'll share it on our Facebook page, the photo of it. It's wild. It really does look like a galaxy in the universe.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
It seems like a trip, like a drug trip.
Yeah,
Like there's probably
totally,
drugs
yeah.
going on.
You probably don't
there,
even
but
need to take anything. You're just
No, I don't
already
think you need
out of
to
your
take
mind
anything.
just being there.
Yeah.
You're probably safer not taking anything. But like, come on, who comes back from Burning Man? It's like, did you take any drugs? Nah, it was just
Yeah.
fun the way it was. Like what? Like they literally light shit on fire. There's a bunch of
I
people
know.
doing these large scale like metalwork sculptures, and there's a bunch of free flowing drugs. And you're like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm chased at Burning Man. Come on, man. Who did that? You know what? That's actually a big dick move. I'm sorry. That's crazy. Like, I would respect that person. I'd be like, holy shit, dude.
Hey, you never know, bud. Maybe
You're on
the-
another level. Yeah.
Some people are just fucking wired into that realm naturally, man. Or
Yes.
you
And
know,
then they take
This is-
drugs.
no, but I know
This is
they're
funny
like-
to bring this up. I have friends that like have never tripped before, but think this way constantly. They have these
yes.
really like out there thoughts.
me too.
Never tripped.
Me too. I have
Yeah.
people that I know who don't do psychedelics, but they're not exactly in our 3D reality. They're kind of like in the membrane, dancing between the two realms because their concepts are so psychedelic and the way they present themselves is so psychedelic. It's very impressive to see. Well, interesting to see is the right word.
It's interesting. Totally, I agree. Yeah.
Unique bastards. I needed all these drugs
Yeah.
to like wrinkle my brain.
I need all these drugs to think this way. Damn it.
I really did, though. I mean, I had such a boring 3D way of seeing things. And I mean, boring is, let's say, I didn't look past my
Mundane or
nose
something.
much. Sorry?
Like mundane, kind of just like everyday or whatever, boring that way. Or
Granted, I guess is a good word. Like
Oh,
whatever's in
okay.
whatever's in front of me or whatever concepts are given to me by the people around me. This kind of young, like little brother energy. Just this kind of like, oh, that's what that is. Thanks. Like I'm not gonna think for myself
Yeah.
in that way. And then suddenly my teacher is like an obscure plant energy, or whatever. Like like
Yeah.
shrooms when I'm like in high school, and I'm just like, what the fuck. And when people say like PTSD is being treated by MDMA, everyone who's ever taking anything
yeah.
close to MDMA is like, okay,
Yeah.
we get it.
yeah, I could see that.
I'd-
It really just like shifts your perception of like what is and what could be, and it's interesting. It's sort of like
Loosens your
it's
grip.
like you have this like one. It's like you grow up and like you're taught all these things, and those ideas become ingrained in your brain.
yes.
And then like for me, I remember like tripping and being like, holy shit, like it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
yeah.
Like there are other things out there. There are other ways of thinking, and
Mm.
yeah, that's the wild part about it.
I want to get into MDMA for PTSD and for all the things that it's showing to treat, because I did MDMA once. I've done ayahuasca and all that kind of stuff, but I was never really interested in MDMA. But I think it was 2 years ago, I decided to take it and go to a rave party kind of thing, and we took 2 pills, and this fucking thing hit me so hard. I remember thinking you can't feel this good without having the opposite effect. Like I'm way too high in I guess now that I know it's the dopamine rush. And it took me a month to fully recover after that. I was depressed. I just felt like a fog. So I'm sure that these treatments with like MAPS stuff, they're not doing at the doses I was taking.
No.
Yeah, so that's
no.
a big thing. Is there like a sweet spot that they're figuring out, or are they kind of just doing?
They're like, so there's like, so the way to get into that question is like, it depends on the condition you're trying to solve. For specifically MDMA and depression, it's a very low dose. It's not high at all.
Okay.
But for example, the high dose studies are usually for people that have fear associated with like terminal cancer.
Okay.
The high doses are used for people that are like, you are going to unfortunately die of like this bad cancer. And they usually give them a high dose to make them feel better about dying.
Okay.
Because you pretty much kill them like in this weird like pseudo like this
Yeah.
controlled like ego death, and it's like, oh, okay, that wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. And a lot of things that are for like psychological conditions that you are like, you're going to live for a long time. You have no like conditions that say you're going to pass away anytime soon. Those are like pretty low doses.
Okay.
I don't know I can't speak to the exact dose, but I know it's in the realm of like a much lower MDMA dose for PTSD. And the psilocybin one for depression is also a pretty low dose, but then you get into psilocybin for people with like, end of life treatment, and it's really high. It's a really high dose.
It's the heroic.
Because as you know,
it's the
you
heroic
get
dose.
these sorts of like really. I've never taken a high dose of psilocybin or LSD or anything, but I've obviously read that with these high doses, you have this very like DMT entity type trip. Where
I can attest.
Yeah, you can attest to that.
I wonder if MDMA, is the treatment considered a microdose? Or is it just less than the?
No, it's more than a microdose. It's more than what a microdose would be considered. Actually,
you want to get the feeling, sort of. You want to get like that.
Yeah.
That
okay.
I don't know what to describe it like.
Usually, what they do in these studies is it's not just like, oh, here's MDMA, like go figure out your depression. They want you to talk to a therapist while you're under the experience of the MDMA. So they want you to be sober enough to be able to talk like fluently. Okay. They don't want you to be super intoxicated that you can't really connect in this world.
And that's why they always specify it's psychedelic assisted therapy.
Yes.
Psychotherapy, yeah, exactly. And there's even a newer one that's starting in January. I forget the name of the big company, but they're combining MDMA and LSD for psychotherapy. What's that?
Mind-Med.
Like he knows.
Mind-Med. Do you know this?
I'm invested in them.
That's them.
Let's go Mind-Med. I'm invested in them. Yeah. But
you are?
Yeah, and the work they're doing is incredible. And I think that's in phase 2 now, or they're just heading there.
I think it's phase 2.
So they're combining LSD with MDMA.
Yeah, and it's starting in January, I think. So that's exciting.
It's good to hear.
Go trial.
And what are they hoping to find? At least I can get a perspective from you because you're from the science background. What's their what do you call that? A hypothesis behind it?
Yeah. So basically, if you look at all the research, the general outlook of all the research, and what they do is they treat them with like 3 treatments sometimes. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 2, but usually it's 3 treatments. Okay. And it's 3 treatments that are pretty low. And they space them about a week apart.
Okay.
So they give you a treatment, they talk to you, you go home, you come back for the second one, you come back for the third one. And they give you a follow-up question. They give you these questionnaires, and they're self-reported questionnaires that basically rate your depression before you take any of the MDMA, and they would rate your level of depression during each clinical trial, and then they do a 1-month follow-up and a 6-month follow-up.
Okay.
And what they want to see is that basically what they've shown is that 6 months, the most they do in terms of follow-up studies is 6 months.
Okay.
And the effect has been prominent 6 months after the start of the study. So basically the medication works for at least up to 6 months, where they don't necessarily feel as depressed, they feel less depressed. But they haven't done follow-up studies like a year after or 2 years after because the studies haven't been going on long enough.
Yeah.
So they're hoping that there'll be a long-lasting result of like, it's not that you're like, it is kind of like your cure of depression. They want to have a long-lasting result that they don't see you experiencing depression for like longer periods, and hopefully 6 months, I guess now.
6 months is a long time though. Like that's.
It is, yeah.
It stands to reason.
Most of them show at least 6 months because that's the maximum that's been measured.
Okay.
But it's interesting that they're combining MDMA with LSD. I think that's
Yes.
interesting. I've never taken both drugs. I haven't taken MDMA at all.
Okay.
And of course, then I wouldn't have ever taken MDMA and LSD at the same time. So I
Yeah.
can't speak to the personal experience of it.
I'm very interested in the results coming from these kind
You're
of
also very interesting.
I'll take it. Yeah, I would love to see what comes from this because this is the first time I heard of that combination. You know,
I tried MDMA with mushrooms once, and
Oh.
I have to say it was the best trip of my life.
wow, I didn't even know this.
It was just, I mean, there's nothing like extravagant that happened, and I don't feel like I took enough shrooms to get like a very strong, like a religious experience or anything, but I just had enough like to. It was an accident. Like I kind of had these party levels of both drugs and was just looking to have fun, but then I just like found myself in this visually activated, floaty, happy, like the best parts of both drugs, just like hitting this perfect dead center. And I was like, just thinking about it now, I feel like I could breathe more easily. Like it was just such a nice feeling. I remember out loud going, whoa, like a generic, like a Keanu Reeves moment. I had a Keanu Reeves moment. I had a Bill and Ted like whoa moment. I remember I was in the bathroom and I was looking at a spider. This was actually happening, by the way. Everyone's like, that wasn't real, right? But I actually see a spider in the corner of the bathroom and he's playing. It's kind of like stuck in its own web, and it's kind of like fucked up and like trying to get out of it. And I'm literally looking at a spider caught in its own web, like some beautiful weird metaphor or something. And I just go, whoa, like, and then I laugh because I heard myself do that. It was just an honest response. And it's like, I'm a reserved person usually. Well, at least I think I am. I know I'm not, but don't correct me. but just to have this kind of weight off my chest. I think there's no other way to put it. I had this big weight off my chest and I just had this childlike happiness. So, and I haven't had a lot of experience with LSD, and I'm sure you're strongly aware that most people probably haven't even taken LSD in their life, even though they think they have. So, like, I don't know what the fuck I took. Yeah.
That's something we could get into. That's an interesting one, why that is.
I would love to. Perfect segue.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, yeah, the whole thing you just talked about where, like, people probably haven't taken LSD. I think they have. That's interesting because I guess, like, I thought about this too when I first tripped. You know, I just got an acid from some like guy that I barely knew. Like, oh yeah, here's some acid. Like, you know, oh yeah, it's 150 micrograms. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just like saying a bunch of crap. And it could be N-bomb. It could be some other lysergamide. But yeah, I can't say that
N-bomb?
I can't. Oh, NBOME is so it's called 25. There's a few derivatives, but basically it is. You could say it's a derivative of mescaline. Have you guys heard of mescaline before? Yeah. So it's basically if you take like two mescaline molecules and kind of like glue them together, and it's a bigger molecule. But unfortunately, there's a specific position where you can put an atom called an iodine, and it's called 25I. And it's unfortunately a few people have died from it.
Ooh,
but the compound was created by a chemist named David Nichols. Who is a psychedelic chemist that worked a long time at Purdue University in Indiana, and he synthesized a lot of these novel psychedelic drugs. But, you know, I guess what we're getting into is, like, I can't say that I've confidently, knowingly taken LSD, but recently I did acquire, like, 1P-LSD. And I'm pretty sure it was 1P-LSD because you buy it from those like RC markets online. They have a little stamp on it, and they give you the HPLC data and all the characterization. So I trust that was 1P-LSD. But yeah, it's interesting because I can't confidently say like I've taken LSD before. I can confidently say I've taken 1P-LSD at this dose.
Okay.
And I think that's like that's a hard thing about like taking psychedelic drugs. There's no like hardcore regulated market, so you're just like trusting some random person on the streets. And I think the online research chemical community is better.
Probably your best bet.
Than, like, probably your best bet, yeah.
At least in the current situation. Like, this is why I'm a huge. I believe in the legalization for these substances in a medical setting, because we're going to get regulated like the closest to the exact measurements and everything through the pharmacology and all that stuff. I'm not sure how I feel about the recreational market yet for these kind of experiences because it's so variant in what it could be treated for. And I think, like, for example, that MDMA experience I had, I kind of blasted my dopamine or something. I was fucked up for a month, you know?
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, so
Um,
I'm excited for where it's heading medically.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that like yeah, I definitely agree that like we all have biases as people, right? And I have the slight bias as like a researcher, and I'm like, oh, I want to see like the research and the clinical trials before it was ever recreationally legal. I do agree with you on that.
There's,
But at the
sorry.
same token, like I understand that like people do want to, people are going to take drugs whether you tell them or not tell them, right? So
Well,
it's
that's
like
where it's going to
there's
head.
that problem.
It's
too.
going to head there, whether it's in
Yeah.
10 years or in 30 years. We're probably going to see
Yeah.
recreational shops that you can pick up some
We-
fucking ayahuasca.
Probably.
Yeah.
Like, Amsterdam you can buy the mushroom truffles, right? You can buy those in Amsterdam.
But an argument to my original point is that, you know what, if it does end up that way, at least you know exactly what you're purchasing at the store versus some fucking
Yeah.
Grateful Dead guy making your fucking LSD or whatever.
Yeah, like even if you have, that kid, like that 16-year-old waiting outside the depth,
Yeah.
like waiting,
Score
like,
some ayahuasca.
Yeah, like exactly, like, hey man,
Ayahuasca.
I'm too young. Can you go buy this like DMT for me in the store? Like even though that sounds crazy to us today, it's leaps and bounds safer than whatever like back alley transaction that's like in our nightmares and our pasts, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I'm curious. I have a random question from what you were saying before. It's not so random, but like you're saying you've tried like this newer experience where you had LSD, and then so
Yeah.
you have this kind of mystery LSD experience in your past because you're not sure exactly what it was. Like, could you theoretically try different LSD types or
Yeah.
derivatives and then kind of remember and be like, oh, it was this type? Like, is it that distinct?
Yeah, I mean, this is if you've read P-Cow or Alexander Shulgin, this is what he tried to do.
Interesting.
So Alexander Shulgin is this very famous, iconic person in the psychedelic community. He's unfortunately not alive anymore, but he did live into his like early 90s. He didn't die young or anything. But in the 1970s, 60s, he had a chemistry lab in his garage, right? And he unfortunately was busted by the DEA office because he was making psychedelic drugs. He was synthesizing like DMT and LSD, but also like taking these molecules and modifying them, making derivatives like like that 2CI, 2CE, which are all these mescaline derivatives. So he essentially tried to do this in a book called P-Cow. I recommend the book highly to anybody that's into the psychedelic stuff. So he tries to explain the differences between like small chemical substitutions on molecules. So the answer is yes, you can do it. So in my own curiosity, I currently have like 1P-LSD and I have Ethelad. Have you guys heard of Ethelad?
No.
Nope.
Ethelad is another LSD derivative. There's also like ALD52. So I am curious to try a bunch of these analogs and see if I can feel the differences. But I also don't like to trip that much. I think like in the 29 now, so I first tripped when I was 19. So in that 10 years, I've had 10 trips. So like, about one trip a year. So it's hard to like actually try all these drugs and figure out the effects. 'Cause I don't want to trip that much, right? But
I wish
over
I
the
would have done
course
it
of
that way.
What's that?
I wish I would have done it that way. Like you're not diluting your experience.
Yeah, I'm not super experienced in psychedelics. I'm really interested in them, but I haven't tripped a lot, right? Like, I think actually 10 times. Yeah, I counted it the other day. I was just writing down in my journal like how many trips I've done.
Well, that's for me too. There's moments in my timeline where like they were kind of unnecessary trips. we all kind of didn't know what we're getting ourselves into, and it could have went sour, but we kind of rode through it. But I had a journal. I stopped writing it because I realized just to absorb the full experience, I didn't need to keep marking down each time and what was going on. But there was like a solid 4 years that it wasn't even necessary what I was doing. It was just like the MDMA experience was it was amazing, but it was completely unnecessary.
From any kind of like
Well, I think
beneficial.
Yeah,
standpoint,
it was like a recreational use, and I didn't find any benefit from it. It kind of fucked me up for that month. You know.
Are you doing that deliberately? Are you spacing them out to kind of?
No, I just can't handle like that headspace. I just like it's too much. It's too like it's so intense for me to like. I enjoy it, but like it's so intense. I don't want to go to that place like a lot. You know, it's it's like the I guess the analogy I made last time when I tripped. It's like I kind of felt like it was like sort of like a psychotherapy session that happened in like 6 hours that would have happened in like 6 months with a psychotherapist. Like it's really
Yes.
jam packed, like a lot's going on. There's a lot of information to absorb. And I don't think, even if I tripped like once a month, I don't think I'd be a functional human being, to be honest. I wouldn't be functional.
What's your
When you put it that
curiosities for ayahuasca? Have you ever any interest in that?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious in ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Because like it's like the oldest psychedelic drug that exists, right? It's older than, the mushrooms which came from the Aztec people in Mexico. I think it's the oldest thing out there.
I think recorded
yeah, I am
history,
curious.
it's 4,000 years, I believe.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I
And
believe.
there is that, like, you're talking about this tradition that's involved with ayahuasca. The whole ceremony is like the
Yes.
tradition of ayahuasca. And I feel like tying that into a psychedelic experience, like it is a different experience than if I were to just take ayahuasca and go
100%.
walk around outside. That setting of being in the ceremony makes it different, right?
100%. That changed
So-
everything for me. The setting
am
of
curious.
the setting for a ceremony changed the entire psychedelic experience for me. Where like I would only do it in a ceremonial setting kind of thing now. Whether
Yeah.
it's ayahuasca, whether mushrooms or DMT, that setting that you create, I don't know what it does, but it just changes the whole feel for the experience, and the experience changes because of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a thing that people preach a lot on psychedelics. It's like the two biggest things are set and your setting, right?
Yeah.
Like setting being like where you are, or like what's going on around you, and like if you're like taking psychedelics in a really hostile environment, like that's not going to be a good trip, right?
I have one experience that always comes to mind. Hostile's not even the word, but this was instantly a scenario where set and setting were completely like destroyed or kind of turned on me, and it was with ketamine. So I had this weird, disembodied, numb kind of, but still very psychedelic feeling. I know it's like a tranquilizer or something, but it's a very weird and effective like psychedelic experience. And I was at a friend's place, and lack of intention, just kind of like that's the power behind the whole set and setting thing. So we're just like at an apartment, and then this guy is like, "Oh, guys, by the way, my mom's gonna come over soon."
Oh boy.
Yeah, and she never came. She never came. This is I just want to tell you right now. So the three of us suddenly
Panic.
but not out loud. Like the mood just was ruined, and then for the next like 20 minutes, I don't know about them, but probably the same as me, I just felt like I was in hell. Like I was in some kind of strange emotional like vice of this torture feeling, this anticipation, this having to pretend to be sober and knowing I'm gonna fail, and it was just the worst time of my life. Yeah. I've had like crazy pains and horrible like experiences, but that was this kind of dread that I just don't want to ever explore again. It was so unnecessary, and like we dissect it a lot on and off the podcast, but intention with anything is like super important. It's just like it's literally the direction in which you're going, or it's like it's the why, it's the foundation. It's like there's something so blatantly important, and like it's almost like silly to say it out loud because it's so intrinsic to the experience. But then you just have this kind of, like we were saying before, like growing up in a certain way and just thinking that's okay because of the language we use or the experiences we've had. So then, you'll take shrooms with some friends and it's like a party drug mentality, or you'll go to a rave and take ecstasy, and those might be nice experiences, and maybe having a different experience might have mitigated that month of like feeling like shit. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's maybe the big function, the big intention is getting the best out of this. That's what the ceremony is for, is like, this is not a fun time. This is not and who knows what's gonna come out the other end, because every experience changes us, So, and this is, like you said, like 6 months crammed into 6 hours is the best way I can describe any psychedelic.
Yeah,
and,
seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
like it's a bullet coming out of a gun, man. We gotta be careful. big time.
Yeah, totally. And I guess like, but the last two trips I did, I had like intention, and I think the first like, I think the first bunch of trips, I'd say bunch as like five. I guess I just thought it was like it was interesting and kind of fun, but I didn't really have intention. And I think because the last two trips I had like intention, it like did help with the problem that I was like trying to solve
Nice.
or like figure out. And specifically was that like I have this issue or whatever that I don't cry. Like I don't cry sober, which is like strange or whatever. And I think it's maybe like the societal perception of like, you're a man, you don't cry, you don't do this and that crap. And I was talking to my girlfriend about this. She's like, yeah, it is kind of like weird. Like most guys, like even guys like do cry and you don't. And I was trying to like work through it during these two trips I had. And you know, during those two trips, I did cry a lot, which was pretty cool. It was like the first time in my life I'd ever really cried. It was like beautiful.
It's the
And it
best.
wasn't even like I was crying about anything sad. Like I remember we were standing on the beach in Nova Scotia, you know, Eastern Canada. I was out there for this trip. We're standing on the water, and I remember looking up to the sky and just feeling like existing, like we exist at this very moment in time. And the fact that we exist is a really special thing. It's really
Yes.
meaningful that we exist. And I remember crying because I felt like it was really meaningful that I existed as a human being, just like something I would never feel sober or
Oh,
whatever.
it's beautiful.
I always
But it was
describe it as
great.
like when you have that kind of happy cry and that like kind of psychedelic space cry. It's always
Yeah.
like the words meant to be come to mind all the time. Like like shame falls away, pride falls away, like the need to
Yeah.
control and micromanage falls away, and you know, if you're staring at a sunset on a beach, it might help, but for the most part, you're feeling like I'm supposed to be here. This is meant
Yeah.
to be. Everything's okay
Yeah.
or good enough, you know, and that's good
Yeah.
enough. Like it's
Yeah.
what's that guy? Jason Silva? I forget
Oh,
his name,
okay, sure, that guy.
but he always
Is
says,
that? I
huh?
know this guy.
You know
Yeah,
what
I
I'm
know
talking
this.
about? Yeah.
I know this guy. Yeah.
But he always describes, he's quoting somebody, but it's like there's this falling into the void kind of abyss thing with death, with life, with psychedelics, with like everything that mirrors these experiences. And then there's this kind of like hidden feather bed that's like waiting for you. And it's that feeling of like, oh, like I was really scared, but like there's this relief now. And that might not even be what you're describing. It might just be like you didn't have to go through hell to get to heaven sometimes.
No,
Sometimes you just kind of
I
end up
didn't
there.
have to. No, I didn't have to go through hell. I remember like I've definitely had difficult, uncomfortable trips, but nothing like I've seen. You know, you read some trip reports about people like getting arrested and this and that, but I've
Oof.
never had any like really like intense bad things happening in my psychological state tripping.
Nice.
You know, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, but overall it's been pretty good. One of the things that like brought me to this realization is that I did two trips in Nova Scotia. One was only 50 micrograms and the other one was 75. I don't like take high doses or whatever just because I'm kind of like I'm a little bit scared of high doses, to be honest. But the first trip I remember, like I was on the beach on 50 micrograms and I was holding a rock, and I had the thought that like this rock was probably formed in some volcano like 10,000 years ago or something. So like this rock, if it had existence, you know, me existing for like 80 years would just be a blip in its total existence of being a rock. And it kind of gives you the idea that like time like is super relative, you know, like millions and billions of years in the past have already happened, and where we are right now is like the current moment of time, and time will keep going, and someday we're gonna, you know, unfortunately pass away. But it just like it's super special to like exist at like a very moment in time is kind of thing that was hammered home to me in this trip, I remember.
It's a beautiful realization, man.
That's kind of like that's just nice to hold. Like just kind of enjoying the fact that you're here, if you want to put it in a simple way.
Like
and we're all
deep in-
here together, like
Deepest
now.
level of presence, you know?
Because it really puts you, like what psychedelics seem to do for me is like in your normal everyday life, you're thinking about like things that happened in the past, or you're like working on a project thinking about the future. It's hard to really immerse yourself like in the very moment. I think right now we are, which is really nice, immersing ourselves in the moment by having a conversation. But like in that psychedelic space, you really are like all you can think about is like what you're experiencing in that very moment. It's hard to like it is harder. At least in my perspective, think about like the past or the future. It's like, what am I experiencing and feeling right now?
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's definitely cathartic too. Maybe that's. I like. That's what I want to hold on to, and what I want to teach myself through these experiences. Like in a nutshell, it's like the only reason I do anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just to kind of find the center, and then to kind of be. Just kind of be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Totally.
It's funny that that's hard, and maybe that's that mechanism you just described. It makes me think of a bad trip, because like once it gets through that barrier, this persistent and very thick presence, you know, if that gets penetrated by a future or past like anxiety, fear thing, then it's hard to shake that, and you're kind of it's like it's bled into your present, and then you're in this kind of paranoia, where you're thinking like my movements will be the wrong movements, and it's like, dude, you are overthinking it.
Yeah. I remember having that experience on acid. I was called acid before I ever bought like real
Worst
acid.
name for a drug ever.
I remember for whatever reason feeling like I'm actually just going insane. I was like, I'm actually just like going insane. And I convinced myself that I was like going insane. And then you get all the paranoia and you think about like, oh, like what if your heart starts racing? And that was definitely one of the it wasn't a terrible trip. I'd call it a bad trip, but you know, it wasn't anything awful.
Those are the
But
best
you know,
trips,
you
man.
eventually, what's that?
I said those are the best trips.
Oh God, really? Oh,
I love going down those spirals of panic.
He's a glutton for punishment. He wants
so
to build
terrible.
calluses.
Yeah, seriously, masochist.
He's big on what doesn't
Oh, I
kill you
hate-
makes you stronger.
Yeah.
Oh God, man, props to you. I hate these trips, and I have to remind myself that like it's a molecule and it'll get kicked out of this receptor and I'll feel normal again. I always tell myself that during those trips, but I haven't. It's been a few years since I've had that kind of trip. You know,
the mindset I have in that is that it's not the trip that's the problem; it's your resistance.
Yeah, you think that's what it is?
You have to think about it.
I've heard that before.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but letting go of your resistance can be the hardest thing. But
yeah,
you know, that's the real suffering, is that that panic reaction that you can actually control. It's not the experience.
Yeah. What's tricky is that that's activated by different things. So I feel like learning to not resist in different scenarios is like those are all separate skills. So it's like you run up like you're right, but I'll add that tagline. Right. Like it's not as simple as I don't resist anymore. Like maybe it is, and
it's
I just
a muscle. It takes time to work.
Yeah, it might be.
It really.
I like how we all agreed. No, it might be. It might be. Yeah.
No,
there is this kind of.
That's
general
I've heard people
feeling.
say this before. This idea that you have to surrender to the experience.
Yes,
that's total, and that's why you're having a
But
bad
there's so many depths to surrender, and I'm still on probably the first or second rung of the ladder, because surrendering can go as far as, okay, you're actually surrendering your actual death. Like we haven't, no matter what kind of surrender you experience in a psychedelic trip, the biggest surrender we're all going to face is the physical reality death.
Yeah.
So the surrendering, and then imagine surrendering your loved ones who pass away. Like surrender has depths to it. So in the psychedelic experience, it may be hard to surrender at times, but these are muscles that we're building. And that's why I think psychedelics are so crucial for someone with the clinical stage 4 cancer who's on the deathbed, who works with the MDMA therapy or whatever. They pretty much just learned how to surrender before their actual death, right? That's the power of these huge doses on them. So when you have those kind of experiences, those trips where
it's like a practice run.
Yeah. I look at it like that now, and it's just, these are training wheels for the big surrender.
That's a cool perspective. And I mean, I've heard it, but I've never like actually put it into practice like during a bad trip, so to speak. And
you got to try,
maybe
man. Flex that muscle.
Flex that muscle.
It could be worked on. That's the beauty in it. That's why when I go into experiences now, it's like, I still panic. I have those moments, but I've been here before. Okay, now the muscle's growing. I'm breathing. I'm working through it. You know, it's not the experience that I'm afraid of. It's just my reaction that's fueling this fear. Yeah.
What I might tell somebody is, please.
I was gonna ask, you seem like maybe you've taken high doses before, and what have those been like? I'm curious about this a little bit.
I've taken huge doses of psilocybin, and it's Like I think the most after 5, it doesn't change anything. It's you're at the heroic dose, but
The heroic dose. Yeah.
for the sake of just for the story, it was 7 grams, and it was very difficult, man. It was so much fear, so much regret for taking that amount, so much.
That didn't cross my mind. It's funny that you were like, "Get out of me."
Yeah. And the setting was off. I was with my best friend at the time and my ex at the time. So she was my ex at the time, and we just reignited this friendship with a psychedelic.
I just got like a flop sweat when you said that.
It was just the set.
Intense,
So talk about setting and sets. Like it was just. So that was a hard one to do, surrender, but I worked through it for a 6-hour fucking journey, because what's the alternative? I just panic and make it harder, or I find moments to just surrender, and that's where it came up.
Here's the finger trap of what we're saying, though. What if this is a possibility? I think if you're surrendering for realsies, that's a technical term. You don't care if you're in a bad trip anymore. So the goal is not to alleviate or cure the bad trip. If you're surrendering realsies, then it's like, so be it.
That's it.
And that might be empowering in a scary way, but that's what surrender is.
That is it.
Whoa, I just blew my own mind.
That's it. Well,
that's pretty interesting.
Think about the big surrender. I talk about death. It's a trip. You're let's say you're given the news you have a week left, or you're literally at the deathbed. There is no control over what's going to happen next. So you kind of have to create this passive experience where you just allow it to happen. And that's the kind of mindset I go into that's my only intention now when I go into psychedelic space. It's not I want to fix this part of my life or this relationship. I'll surrender to whatever arises. You know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I've always went into it like, oh, I have this like bad personality trait, or this like I don't cry and I want to fix this. But you're more so like whatever arises. That's interesting.
Because you have to remind yourself that it's not you in control of this experience. So your specific intention may be your specific intention, but you're communicating with the molecule that's has its own thing that it's doing. And you might go in with this personality trait, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about what you said to your mother last week or something like that, and you're like, oh fuck, I wanted to focus on this. It's like that's where you're starting to create.
And that's why there's no psycho-assisted therapy with DMT or ayahuasca.
But that's where you start forming these expectations or these directions that you're trying to impose, and that's where bad trip starts to formulate, because it's not.
Interesting.
It's you're bringing in your control into the experience that isn't your control.
I think a lot of us could even say that we've encountered maybe like a thought or something like it's almost like you go through a door and you're like, oh, last time that was a bad trip, and now it's like that feeling kind of arises, but you've been here before, so you feel okay, and it's literally like the same place, air quotes or something, but you're equipped now.
Yes.
And that might also kind of explain that syllabus vibe that you get from some drugs, especially ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Is that it's like you're always at the edge of what you're ready for.
Yeah.
And you always kind of feel like you're falling, and it's freaky.
Yeah. And
I like that. Yeah, like that was a good explanation. I like that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Like
Drugs.
I'll put one more out there, because we got to end this soon. But
I got a cool question also. Damn it.
Just ayahuasca. I came in once in one ceremony, and it was. I tell Sammy this all the time. Because there was a summer I did it 3 ceremonies back, like within a 3-month span, so one every month, and these are 2-night ceremonies. So, the second out of those 3 was with Sammy, and it was a brutal trip for myself. And then the third month, so the last month of the third trip, I go, and I had this like little bit of an ego that was formulating, like, oh, you've been doing ayahuasca this whole summer, we're ready for this one, you know. And then I don't know what it is that communicates to you with ayahuasca, but there was like this voice that came in, is like, oh yeah, you think you got this? Figure this out. And I went down like a tornado spiral where I lost identity. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was, and I had to go outside, and I was the world was spinning, and I didn't have any idea who I was or where I was or what I was doing. And that was literally 4 hours like that. And that panic, I was crying. I was holding on the grass, apologizing to Mother Earth for coming in with this cockiness, you know?
Yeah.
So that showed me that, hey, your surrender muscle ain't strong enough for this realm yet. Go back to practice.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it was brutal, man. I was in a washing machine, man. Just spinning around and with trying to grab onto Nate or Nathaniel and trying to grab onto who I was, but I wasn't catching it, you know?
Yeah.
So surrender goes deep, man. It goes fucking deep.
Oh, that's intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably why I'm scared. I don't know about apprehensive to smoke DMT or 5-methoxy DMT.
If you make your way to
'Cause
Montreal,
it's because it's like you have to surrender. Like you can't control any of that. You don't even like know who you are in those states of what I've read. So like you don't have a choice, and that's the surrender thing is scary because exactly that. You don't even have it. It's not like LSD. I feel like you have a choice. You're still kind of yourself depending on the
you
dose.
could splash cold water in your face and kind of tame it a little bit, you know?
But DMT, no.
No.
Of what I've read, no.
NN, a little bit. NN DMT,
NN
you can
a little
open
bit.
your eyes, you can panic a little bit, and it kind of shuts off the experience a little bit. 5-MeO, there's
I've
no
heard,
negotiation.
yeah.
There's,
Yeah.
when you're there,
No
you're
negotiation.
you take the right dose. It's you grab the train and your hand is stuck to the train. You know.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, because maybe or maybe not, I might allegedly serve it to certain people. I always say
He's a shaman. Come after him. No, I'm kidding.
I'm running a church here.
but what I say to them is everything that happens before that takeoff is what you need to surrender, because once you take off, you're good. You're there. Yeah. But it's that moment and that moment can be a millisecond or a second or whatever, can feel like eternity. And it's that moment, if you release that, phew,
it's the bungee jump.
Fear doesn't go in that door. Fear stands at the doorway looking in, you know? So as soon as you go through the door, you're good. You're good.
Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds wild because I've never. It seems like you maybe have had experience with 5-MeO, but it's like your whole humanity gets stripped away. You don't really know what you are, but you are aware. You have awareness, right? You're aware of things, and that's crazy. It's like your awareness without the fact that like I am me and you are you. It's like you're just this like thing.
Yes.
It is by definition disorienting,
wild.
For sure.
You are just awareness. That is it. There is no concept of any type of reality. It's just literally awareness. And I can't, like we were talking about limited in language, there's no explanation for what awareness means. Yeah. But it's just, like I tried to bring it into words, and it just, the best way I would describe it was like there's a bucket pouring water into me, and that water is consciousness, and I'm not in the stream anymore. I'm back in the bucket. That's best.
Crazy.
It's the best way I can word it. Yeah.
You had to touch your face. You were like, oh.
Yeah. So
I'm so like, I love reading about like 5-methoxy DMT. I kind of want to try it, but I'm also like, oh, that sounds scary. I don't know.
It is. That's the one that requires a lot of respect for. Well, they all do, but 5-MeO is not. If you're not prepared to surrender, it can be brutal in the attachment to who you think you are and this physical reality. It can be very intense, and it wasn't easy even for my first time with it. It was very difficult. But it's so beautiful once you gain that perspective and knowing that that sensation and that feeling of detaching from everything that you think is reality. Yeah, it's there's a reason why addicts that do 5-MeO in the Bufo medicine, their addiction is literally eliminated afterwards. Maybe they have a little bit of withdrawal, but I'm sure the research is going to show that. It's incredible, at least anecdotally, you know?
It is, yeah. I remember hearing about Mike Tyson talking about it on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yeah.
This like really manly man fighter talking about how he's like surrendering to the toad.
Yeah, you know, like what? That blew my mind too. I'm like, Mike fucking Tyson.
Yeah, I agree. That blew my mind.
I didn't really see it that way. We don't want to take up too much of your time. I had a funny question, to wrap it up. If you have some.
Totally, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I just, my friend Jason brings up the concept of soma a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with Brave New World.
The Rig Veda, like that ancient text soma on the Rig Veda. Yeah, I've heard of it before.
But I'm talking more about the concept of like a drug in the future maybe that will kind of like pop us into like a blanket state of happiness, essentially, and maybe in a Orwellian scary way, like a state of complacency. And I'm wondering if you want to talk about the real soma. That's a really good topic, also. But like whatever's in your brain right now, let it rip. I just wanted to kind of
what's in my brain is both ideas. So, soma is this word. It was in this ancient text called the Rig Veda, and a lot of people thought soma was Amanita muscaria. Have you heard of fly agaric or Amanita muscaria mushroom?
The red,
red and white dot, the Mario,
the
Super
red
Mario
the Mario mushroom
exactly.
that it looks like. But anyways, soma actually comes up in Aldous Huxley's book Brave New World, and it is that soma is described as this like drug that puts you in this permanent state of complacency and happiness. So I think insofar as the future, it's like I don't know if that'll ever exist. Like this drug that just puts you in this like. Wouldn't that be really addictive if it just made you like permanently happy?
I just picture it as like you have to buy a canister every month and it just circulates in your apartment.
Yeah.
And then it gives you a sign, okay, you have 2 weeks left or 1 week left, go replace the canister.
That exists. It's called nitrous.
That exists.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
No one do that. You will seriously die. I don't know. I see it
I've heard
as
it's very fun though, nitrous. I've heard it's kind of a good time.
well. People laugh. Apparently, you could die from laughing so much because
Suffocate?
because of like you'll just
You
laugh
drown or
until you
something?
die because you can't stop laughing. Like it just tickles you and tickles you until you
Oh, good.
suffocate.
Good. We cut out a little bit. Yeah, we're good.
Oh, he lost us.
We do have to wrap this up,
Yeah,
though.
well,
Yeah, that was,
yeah, fair enough. We should we'll have to talk again at some
Yeah,
point. We
this
missed
was-
a lot of,
this was
we missed
beautiful.
we missed some pharmacology stuff. This was good though.
This was fantastic, man.
We'll be
This
maybe a
was-
little more organized or more intention next time.
No, it's totally fine. No, it's totally okay. But we'll have to do this again in maybe a month or two or whenever you guys get the
I'm
chance.
so down, dude. I had a
100%.
great time talking to you, honestly.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
That was really fun.
Sweet brother. All right, man. Well, thank you for your work and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Have a good day.
Yeah, that's it. How do you say goodbye?
Simple
Right?
stuff.
Yeah.
Take care, man.
All right.